And good evening. This is the Tech Travel Geeks podcast, recorded on the evening of the 5th of August 2018. I'm your host, Matteo, Chief Mobile Opinionist at Tech Travel Geeks, and joined again by Lukasz, our Chief Aperture Officer. Hi, Lukasz.
Hi there.
And, well, congratulations on the launch of the podcast. We should pat ourselves on the back. We had RSS subscribers, and we've set up the RSS feed, so I think we're good to go. What do you think, Lukasz?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start off. We have our first guest on the Tech Travel Geeks podcast. From the other side of the pond and the other side of another continent, we have Myriam Joire joining us. Hello, Myriam.
Hello. How are you guys?
Very well, thanks.
It's very nice to have me. It's a lovely morning in San Francisco, so I'm just kind of waking up and drinking my morning coffee.
Well, thank you for being our first guest.
Thanks for having me.
So, Myriam, we've called you on because I know that you travel a lot. I follow you on social media. I follow the handle @tankgirl with no vowels on Instagram, Twitter, and also on Facebook. And I see you travel a lot. So we thought, who better to have as first guest on the Tech Travel Geeks podcast than someone who travels but also knows her tech?
Yeah.
So tell us about yourself. Where are you from?
It's a little complicated, but I live in the United States today. I am a United States citizen, for better or for worse at this point in time, I might want to add. I also have a Canadian passport because I'm also a Canadian citizen. So I've lived in Canada, and I also have a French passport because I'm a French citizen because I was born and raised and grew up in France. So as you can see, complicated. The travel thing kind of had to happen after that, right? So, I was born and raised in France. I left when I was right after high school, basically, to move to Canada, where I went and did my university education so I was born in the south of France, like near Cannes, Nice, Grasse, where, the perfumeries and the Provence and the Monaco and all that good stuff, and the Alps. And then I moved to Toronto, near Toronto, a place called London, Ontario, in Canada, to go to university at a university called the University of Western Ontario. And then I spent a few years there. And then I moved from there to Vancouver, British Columbia, which is on the west coast of Canada, whereas London and Toronto are in the Great Lakes area on the Eastern time zone. So Vancouver's on the Pacific time zone, like San Francisco. And then I lived in Vancouver for a few years, where I was a video game developer. And then I got a job in Seattle first. So I spent some time there, which is very close to Vancouver. It's like, for Europeans, it'd be the same thing as, neighboring cities. It's not quite as close distance-wise as you'd imagine, because the North American continent is so big. But it's only a 2.5-hour drive, which in the U.S. is very short. And there's a border that can slow you down a little bit. But other than that, then I got a job in San Francisco, and I've lived in San Francisco on and off. Mostly is my home base, basically, since 2002.
Wow.
And then I recently decided to return to my Pacific Northwest roots and got myself a place in Portland, Oregon, so that I can escape the bustle and hustle of San Francisco, which has become very much like New York City in some ways since the tech boom. It's very, very crazy here. So I like to sometimes decompress because I do so much traveling, and it's sometimes hard to do in San Francisco because I'm always wanting to just push forward and do things and build the world. And that's a good thing. And I've done a lot of that in my life, but sometimes you need to kind of take a break. And so I have a place in Portland, Oregon, which is kind of the southern part of northwestern United States. And it's, an hour flight away. It's not in US, that's a commute, essentially. There are people who actually live in Las Vegas and commute to San Francisco for work every day for 50 minutes on an airplane. So I don't do that, obviously, with Portland. I drive or I fly, whatever is most convenient, but it is a day's worth of driving. It's not something you can do in an hour or two, like the commute was between Vancouver and Seattle. Yeah. So there you go. That's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. So, just a bit of background for listeners of the Tech Travel Geeks podcast. I've been a big fan of Myriam since around about 2009 as a listener of the Engadget mobile podcast. I used to listen to Myriam and Chris talking about the week of mobile news, which seemed to be dominated by BlackBerry, this newfangled device called an iPhone, and Symbian devices. And Myriam was really into the camera phone features, where it was still a toss-up between Ericsson or Sony Ericsson at the time and Nokia on who had the best camera phones. So
that's right.
It was crazy, crazy times.
Yes.
So yeah, I used to listen to that podcast on my Nokia N73. And
wow, mobile podcast listening on a phone. You were ahead of your time for sure.
Yeah, it was the crazy days, and what I did was I was at university at the time. This is what got me into the industry. I started listening to more podcasts, reading up more, studying a few things. Eventually, I joined Lukash at a tech company here in Edinburgh as a test engineer, and things went on from there. So now we've started Tech Travel Geeks, and it's great to have you on as the first guest.
Wonderful. Let me give you some context, if you don't mind, about how I ended up at Engadget. Because I said earlier that I worked in video games, and I did. I came to San Francisco to work in video games, and I did start blogging about mobile tech in 2006 officially. I had a friend, and we used to do coffee just a couple of blocks away from here, up the street, and he used to say to me, we used to rant about phones because we were really both into mobile computers, and the closest thing we had at the time that was coming of age was phones, right? PDAs, phones, pocket PCs, some tiny Windows computers. But basically, it was a pivotal time because it was the beginning of the computer in your pocket. And, there are some smartphones, like you said, BlackBerry, some Symbian phones, some Windows mobile phones. Was it Windows Mobile? What was it called back then?
I think back then it was Windows Mobile first time around.
Okay. So all of that, and we would sit down and talk, and they weren't like into it as much as I was, but one day they said, we're having coffee, and they said to me, you should blog about this, and I'm like, blog? And he's like, yeah, and I was like, he's like, you should try WordPress, it's free, and I was like, okay, and I said, why would I do that? Like, I don't really have time. I got this video game job, blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, you have a lot of opinions, and blogging is a thing right now. It's kind of hot. And he says, do you have to ever write documentation or some sort of, reports and stuff for work? And I'm like, sadly, yes, I do. And he says, well, look, I actually he at the time was a relatively up and coming Ruby on Rails developer blogger. So he was a very accomplished Ruby on Rails developer, but he was also a blogger. And he said to me, he was blogging about Ruby, and he said to me, I did it because I wanted to improve my writing skills, and I did. And now it's a lot easier for me to write that pesky technical stuff that I hate writing, because I have developed my own voice and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, maybe that's not a bad idea. So I started Tankgirl Mobile, my blog, tankgirl.com, which now is just like a kind of semi-abandoned website. I mean, I have it. It talks about my consulting business mostly, but I'm trying to kind of revamp it into something else at some point. And I don't feel it is as much of an important thing to have a platform like that anymore, with, podcasting, with video, with YouTube, with social media. But this is pre all of that. This is pre YouTube, pre Twitter. And so, I just started, and that's somehow I found a voice, and the iPhone came out, and that helped me. I think that helped all of us even get more of a voice, because there's a lot to debate and discuss. And then I went from there to, I did a lot. So my background is in electrical engineering. And so even though I've worked as a software engineer in video games, my background is hardware. So I started tinkering with Ultrabooks. Like, I've always been fascinated by putting a computer in your pocket. That's always been the end goal for me. And so now everybody has that. But back then, 10 years ago, you have to put it in context. That was just beginning, right? For the majority of people. And even using a smartphone back then, it was a tough call to replace. And it's still today a tough call to replace, say, a laptop. But now at least you can get a lot done with your smartphone, right? But so I I was into that. So I bought a bunch of Ultrabooks because they were so cheap. And I started tinkering with them because I was like, okay, these are built around standardized chipsets and they're very, very feature limited, right, for cost. So
these are netbooks rather than ultrabooks.
Sorry, netbooks is exactly what I'm talking about. You're absolutely right. Thanks for correcting me. So netbooks, because ultrabooks came later. Oh, netbooks were like cheap, limited in features, but they had standardized chipsets in them. So I'm like, what can I unleash if I crack one of those open? What can I find in there that's unused that we can tap into to add functionality to this computer very cheaply? And this is also around the time where China was pumping out a whole bunch of USB accessories that were really, really cheap, like Bluetooth dongles and whatever. So I cracked a bunch of netbooks open and just added touchscreens and USB, Bluetooth functionality and 3G like HSPA modems and change the hard drives to SSDs and or vice versa depending on the models. All kinds of crazy stuff. Oh look, I found an eSATA port in there. Let's just make it do something, right? So I started with the EPCs and I went to the Acer Aspire series, and I ended my piece, my tinkering career, I would say. Well, I didn't end it, but I mean, I haven't done much since then. But I ended it with the VAIO P series. I actually, found all kinds of things that you could do with the VAIO P that we weren't meant to do, and so it's all still on my blog if you dig around on techgirl.com. The problem is that a lot of my video content at the time, I was way early and ahead of the curve with live video. I did all my videos as live videos on Quick. Do you remember QIK?
Yes.
So that
Nokia acquired them, didn't they?
Nope, Skype did. And then Skype kind of shuttered it down, and I never backed up my videos. I don't know why. For some reason, I thought that these would stay forever. I know better, right? Like I'm an engineer. I get it. Like it's not, the cloud isn't potentially could go away tomorrow, right? Like, I mean, I doubt it. We're pretty deeply in the fabric of it now. It would take a catastrophic event for Google to disappear, for example. But I think that at the time I never really thought too much about the archival aspects of my podcast, of my platform. So I regret today to say that I do not have a backup of these videos of any kind. And so these were great videos. They were instructional videos on how to take apart these netbooks and how to upgrade them, how to trace the hardware, the additional components you could find. So I would probe with an oscilloscope and a multimeter and find like, oh, there's a USB port. Let's tap into that, right? It's an unused USB port. Or like, I found, as I said, SATA ports. I found like extra PCIe interfaces, all kinds of things on there because it's a standard Intel chipset. They didn't turn it off. They just didn't connect them. So yeah, so that put me on the map. Engadget picked me up. Gizmodo picked me up. Hackaday at the time was a bigger blog than it is today because it was part of the Engadget empire, and now it's a separate thing. Weblogs Inc. I don't know if you remember all that, but I'm talking like a grandparent now. But the point is that it was a thing, and that's how Engadget noticed me, and they said, "Hey, would you like to write a column about hacking for us once a month?" And I said yes, and because, I'm a little older and a little more mature and I have management experience and I know how to work in a corporate environment, and because I think I'm a relatively skilled writer and I'm also pretty versatile in what I can cover in tech, within a few weeks of starting this column at Engadget, I started doing other things for them. I got pulled in. Even though I was still working in video games, they were like, "Hey, you're in San Francisco. Can you cover this event?" I'm like, "Okay." Or, can you write about this news article? We're a little short on staff today. I'll 200 words. I can whip that together in 5 seconds. And the next thing you know, the whole team at Engadget was at the time the senior management, basically the people running the show at Engadget were very unhappy with AOL as a parent company that had acquired them a few years earlier. And they decided to leave. They just one day walked out the door. I mean, I'm making it like sounded a little more extreme than it was, but they managed the transition relatively well, I think, but it was a little abrupt. And so as such, the upper management, the people in charge of, and like the editorial direction, I would say, was kind of freaked out when they're all these senior editor and editor-in-chief, everybody's decided, we're out of here, we're giving you a month or whatever. They started hiring, right? They started trying to find replacements. And so they came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to join the team full time? And I was like, I'm a video game developer. I make 150K a year. Like, why would I blog for a living? Remind me again. And they said, well, this is AOL. We are looking for people who have management experience, and you do. And so we can hire you as a manager on that and make the pay scale accordingly. So basically, I'm using example numbers here. Obviously, I'm not going to reveal. I don't know how much I made in video games, but it was close to that. The point is that I was able to take a pay cut, but it wasn't a bad enough pay cut for me to not take the chance and try to to experiment with this new career. So
key question though, did you enjoy the blogging more than working in software game development?
Yes and no. It depends on what you're talking about. And this is going to bring us to travel. I think this is the important thing. Like in video games, I did travel. Every now and then I went to a conference, I did something, but it was, 2-3 times a year, right? And a lot of it was in the US. It wasn't abroad. Also, one of my last jobs in video games was Sony Computer Entertainment of America, which, as you know, is the people behind the PlayStation, in case nobody knows what I'm talking about. And I was a developer support engineer, meaning that I would be sent to fight fires with developers, big name developers. We're talking people who make Rock Band, that kind of stuff, in their studios last minute when they had a crisis, when they were trying to finish a game, when they had a deadline that was sitting on millions of dollars of potential loss if they couldn't ship on time because they had CDs to print. And back then it's all about printing media on time, not having a package you can download on time. So it was challenging. And so these people, I would get flown around often to fix these things. But again, mostly it was North America. And so that was the beginning of my travel. I mean, I've traveled a lot simply because I have family in France, family in Canada. So I fly around Europe and back and forth quite a bit, maybe 2-3 times a year, as was normally would be my schedule. But I had a bit more US travel to that then with my video game jobs, so especially towards the end of my career. And then I get a job at Engadget, and now I have to go to CS, MWC, IFA, Computex, CBIT, like everything, right? So as a senior person, it was my job to be there my job was to manage mobile at Engadget. And so I had at one point, I think 3 editors working for me. And, I had to kind of decide who was going where, who was reviewing what, all that stuff. So the end result is that I did start traveling a lot. And so to answer your question, I like the travel part and the access to technology parts of being a tech journalist a lot. Do I like writing? No, I'm not. I think I'm a great writer somehow. I mean, I've developed the skills over the years. I think obviously I had a baseline of being a decent writer because I can do it well. I'm a very slow writer though, and that's always been a problem. I'm comparatively to some tech bloggers I know. I think I can still hold my own. I can pump out short, brief news stories, several a day, very quickly in a dire situation like CS. Not that I like doing it, but I can. So I've learned to adapt, but I don't think that writing is what I'm passionate about. What I'm passionate about is what I do now as a tech journalist mostly, which is my podcast. I've always found it really easy to tell people with words what I'm thinking and what I like and what I don't like and describe and explain, as you can tell from this show. And so that is why I started, the Engadget Mobile podcast existed at a time, but I don't think it was that exciting. I think that, I like to think that I added something to it. And that was my 1 hour a week where I felt like really that, and the travel and the cool gadget that would land on my desk on a daily basis was the things that made me go, this is a super cool job. The stress around working for AOL, which was really quite a nightmare. And maybe it's changed now because they're owned by Verizon and Oath, or they're rebranded themselves or whatever. I don't know. It's different now. They're together with Yahoo. Who knows? The point is that, it was stressful to deal with the upper levels. Thankfully, I had a great editor-in-chief, Tim Stevens, who sheltered us from a lot of that very effectively. But the reality, in case you don't know who Tim is, he's the editor-in-chief of Roadshow on CNET, which is a car show, blog.
Tim is a great guy.
the car part of CNET. Anything about cars at CNET is what we call the Roadshow, and it's his baby. So I had great time working there, but there were a lot of challenges. Also, we were understaffed. I was getting paid certainly very well, I have to say, but I just felt like it was like I thought video games was stressful in the sense that you'd work a lot and then you'd work even more as you'd get a month or like a few months before shipping. Usually, I worked on big AAA titles, so it was 2-year development cycles. And towards the end of that 2 years, last 6 months, you barely slept and you worked really hard, and that was part of the deal. But this was like that every day. Like it felt like I was finaling a game every day when I worked at Engadget, and it takes a certain person to do that, and it wears you out. And I was also about 20 years older than most of the young 20-year-old editors that have way more energy. And the advantage is that I don't sleep. I don't need to sleep as much anymore. So like, as you get older, you can sleep 5 hours a night and you're fine. So that was my edge. I was always awake. But a lot of them are always awake too, because somehow they managed. Anyway, the point is that Engadget was wonderful. I loved being a tech journalist there. I had a great team, despite some challenges of, being understaffed, having to deal with management, all that. And video games, I think, was a little more relaxed in retrospect, but at the time felt pretty intense. And what I love about video games is I was more creative in a different way. I was crafting code, and I don't craft code anymore. I haven't really crafted code other than for a little bit of experimenting here and there since 2010. And I miss that. I miss that a lot. And if I ever wanted to go back in video games right now as a career, I think it'd be very hard, because there'd be people asking me, what have you been doing for the last 8 years, right? And I would be able to explain what I've been doing, but I think that it wouldn't be relevant to being a video game developer, I think, too much. Maybe management aspects would be. Running my own business and, managing the business side of the business would be. But I don't think that that would end up putting me not in a developer position in video games, which is, so I think my days of getting my hands dirty coding is for money is probably over. Getting my hands dirty for coding is not over. That's going to continue happening.
Yeah, I was about to ask. Yeah, I was about to ask, because I've done some coding in my life as well, and I did really enjoy the pressing the commit button. And right now, because I don't do coding myself just now at the moment at work, the similar feeling to pressing commit is upload video.
Yeah.
Do you feel a bit of similarity between those two?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels. I think the time cycle is very different, but the a lot of the reward and the general structure is very similar. And I think that's probably why you see actually a lot of tech journalists that came from technical backgrounds. And as much as there's a lot of tech journalists who came from other backgrounds, like, of course, journalism, but less so. You see a lot of people who came from, some sort of social science, which I think is also really important, because you have to understand people to understand how technology fits in their daily lives. And so, today I travel a lot, not just because I'm a tech journalist, because really I'm only a tech journalist part-time. My podcast, mobiletechpodcast.com, is my weekly show, and it's my baby. It's my focus. It's what keeps me relevant. It's what keeps the phones landing on my desk, maybe not daily anymore, but at least weekly. And it's what keeps me happy, because I don't think I feel it's hard, because Engadget was such a great platform with the Mobile Tech Podcast for me. I made such a great audience there with that show that, I've had some people that ever since I left Engadget, and we'll talk about why and what happened after that. But ever since I left, wanted me to continue, and I have kind of continued. And then one day, like a year and a half ago, I finally decided to commit to doing this again. And I've got a lot of people who came back, and I got a lot of new people. And podcasting is so natural for me that it's easy, but I don't make money at it really. Like I've explained this on my podcast. It's like we have one sponsor, audible.com, but that's it. And ultimately this is more of a hobby than a job. I don't really make enough money to survive off of it. I do write some stories for some blogs like Pocket Now, Geekspin. Geekspin is Elena's latest venture. She was the person behind Chip Chick. and Elena Stone, and
yes,
she is.
We've been in briefings with Elena and
and
others.
so she's
together.
based in New York, and Geekspin is kind of a culture / meets technology kind of show, an intersection of the two. So I do phone reviews for them sometimes, and I love it. It's fun. But the reality is that doesn't pay the bills, right? So for me, what pays the bills is my consulting business. And that's another reason why I travel a lot. So half of my travel is like, I just was in Chicago this past week because of the Moto Z3 and 5G mod launch. That was, sponsored by Moto, because as a small publication, I can't really afford the travel. So I try to get sponsorships. I went to Computex, that was sponsored by ASUS. I went to CES, and it was sponsored by Huawei, etc. Right? So I always Qualcomm, flew me to many places over the years. I have to give Qualcomm huge kudos for being a huge sponsor of the Mobile Tech Podcast over the years. But the reality is that this is how I can be, kind of a hobbyist, as it were, tech journalist. And don't get me wrong, if I can monetize it more, I would, but right now I don't really have a way to do that without, sinking my entire life into it. And I can't really do that because I'm running a consulting business. So it's interesting. Everybody's in a different way. I have a YouTube channel as well. And that YouTube channel has been existing since Tankerall Mobile, since before Engadget. And back in the day, I used to republish some of my quick videos on there. Just as an afterthought. And those are the ones the videos that survived. But they, my channel was making money when I joined Engadget. At the time, there were no celebrity tech bloggers.
And I think nascent industry.
And I think I was actually probably making more money than most people on YouTube as a tech person in 2009. But now, in or whatever, 2010, whatever it was, and now it's, I make a bit of money, enough to probably buy a coffee a day. It's not bad, right? But it's not going to pay my bills again. So it's a passion for me. It's because I want to stay relevant as a journalist, because I have a voice. People want to hear it, because I want access. And that's why I do it. And I think I'm very clear about this with everyone. If it becomes something, if it grows, if it explodes, if it, great. I think there's too much going on right now in tech. YouTube is well cornered, and the folks who are doing YouTube really well are people that I have a lot of respect for, like we're talking about Michael Fisher, Mr. Mobile, Marques Brownlee, MKBHD. We're talking about, Lewis at Unbox Therapy, Austin Evans, who was on my show a week and a half ago.
That was a great episode.
Oh, thanks. And, people like David Kogan, the Unlocker, etc. I mean, these folks work, that's their job. They work full time at doing this. You have no idea how hard these people work. They work just as much as when I was at Engadget. I have, people, it's kind of weird, because when I was an early blogger in tech, the PR people kind of looked down on us because we weren't the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. We weren't the press. And then they learned, because we became big and started making a ton of money as publications. And then they took us seriously. And then YouTube the YouTube world came in, and people didn't take them seriously. I did, because I knew what they were doing. I knew it was real. And
you and the YouTubers are by definition influencers. You're trusted people who are really influencing people's consumer choices because you're trusted. And specifically in your case, Myriam, you understand the technology behind things. You simplify it and explain it so that people understand the benefits, the unique selling propositions of products, which is great.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so these guys do the same, and they're not taken really seriously. Like I was on a Huawei trip to Europe in June, where most of the people were influencers and YouTubers and podcasters, not tech journalists, bloggers like Engadget, The Verge, CNET, The Wired, or whatever, not press at all, like in terms of New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc. So very interesting how things are changing. Of course, there's a whole Snapchat, Instagram stories, Facebook stories, whatever they're called on Facebook. I don't know. Kids these days, it's too complicated for me. I'm old. I have to admit that I have not made the transition into these mediums primarily because I don't really know how to do it right. I know, and I'm also old school. I just can't. I can handle square video, but I can't handle portrait video whatsoever. I'm just every time I do a Facebook story or an Instagram story, I literally put my phone landscape so that the person watching on the other end has to put their phone landscape. That's how I deal with it.
I get told off by Lukash.
I'm like, my eyes are like this, okay? My eyes are not like that. So I don't understand kids today. Like, I just don't get it. It's like, sure, a human is like that. So maybe if you're taking a lot of videos of humans or smartphones that are vertical, I get it. Anyway, as I said, I'm just too old for this. But look, YouTube's a great platform. It's actually the only platform you can directly monetize. I know that a lot of folks that I know on Instagram make money through sponsorships, but ultimately, I think YouTube's a better platform. And I also think Twitch is a fantastic platform, even though I'm not on it. And I do think that podcasting has had a spike in the mid-early 2000s, or like in the first decade of the century of the millennium. And then it kind of died down a bit. And I think it's taking off again, which is why another reason why I rekindle my podcast, whether it's video podcasting or audio only, like I do audio only, whether it's live or not live, I don't do live because, again, I travel so much. So let's talk about the travel, if you don't mind, because I think
that's great. You're running the show now, so go ahead.
Sorry.
No, this is good.
So the travel. So I said to you guys that I travel a lot for like the blog as a journalist, because I try to get invited to all the big shows. So here's my circuit. There's a circuit. First of all, I did that circuit with Engadget. So it's CES, Mobile World Congress, South by Southwest, GDC, which is around the same time, then Computex, then Google I/O is in there somewhere, then Microsoft Build is also in there somewhere. Computex, then we've got Summer, which is pretty quiet, and then we've got IFA, which I don't go to because I work at Burning Man. I have a gig where I actually get paid to be at Burning Man, believe it or not, and it's right now a pretty big gig in the sense of like my responsibilities, which means I'm there for 3 weeks, which is kind of very disrupting to my life and to my podcast and to things, and I'll explain how I manage that. Then I have, so IFA I miss, and then I have usually the Apple stuff, and then I have, depends on what's going on. There's usually the Nexus launch or the sort of Pixel now. Then there is nothing until sometimes I go to Web Summit, which used to be in Dublin, now is in Lisbon. And then that brings us back to CES. So that's the circuit. So these things are pretty much guaranteed to happen for me. Now, Lisbon/Web Summit is on and off. There's another show called that has been taking place in New Orleans, who's organized the same people who did Web Summit, and I'm completely blanking on the name. It starts with a C. A trade show, and I don't find it very worth my while anymore. So I have gone to that one. It's in the spring. But Collision, that's what it's called. So, and there's Rise in Asia, which is also organized by the same folks, but I have never been to it because, again, finding a sponsor to go there is expensive. So Lisbon, I can kind of afford to do it because it's a reason to see my family in France, and it's cheap. Lisbon is super cheap. So Barcelona, I try to get sponsored. CS, I try to get sponsored, but CS, I don't necessarily get sponsored travel. It's more lodging. That's always the issue. So because I can drive to CS from here, like I can jump from San Francisco in a car. It's an 8-hour drive. It's totally manageable, right?
It's really, really fun in the winter going over Lake Tahoe. Or do you go down to? I
usually go down through Bakersfield, but so I've done the other way too. It's more uncertainty to go through the mountains because, as you know,
I've done that. I've driven over Lake Tahoe in May, at the end of May, and been in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yeah, so you know how unpredictable it is.
From the Nevada desert to snow to back to the desert in Sacramento within the space of hours.
Yeah, it's amazing. So that's so all these trips I try to get sponsored. Of course, Google I/O, Microsoft Build, Apple event, Pixel event. Most of these are either in the Bay Area or in the Northwest Seattle, Portland area. So because I commute back and forth between Portland and San Francisco a lot, I can accommodate being there when on demand, because that's part of my business expenses is my commute between San Francisco and Portland. So that's part of my tax accounting anyway. So I'm not worried if I have to pay for those. But when it comes to, and I have places I can crash with, friends I can stay with in Seattle. Portland is a day trip to Seattle. It's 3.5 hour drive. So it's manageable. I could go for a day and do Microsoft Build for one day if I wanted to, without even spending the night in Seattle. So that's the circuit. And then there is my consulting business. So as I work as a consultant, I help small startups that are foreign companies go to market in the US. And I primarily focus on helping them with their public facing aspects of their launch. So PR, marketing, social media, crowdfunding. And I don't manage or create any of that stuff for them, but I do kind of advise, coach, iron out the bugs, as it were, fix the remove the bumps and remove the red flags, etc. I basically make sure that they are ready to be shown to the folks at Engadget, The Verge, CNET, and Wired, and the YouTubers.
Awesome. So who better than you to do it?
Right. It's a good gig. I love doing it. The problem is it's getting a little dry right now because of the political climate in this country. This whole trade war that's escalating is making these foreign companies be very shy about wanting to come to this country, and it's affecting my business. So I'm going to use your podcast as a platform. I would like to find a job right now to complement my consulting. And so if you listen to this podcast and you know of a PR marketing gig, whether it's consulting gig or a full-time, part-time job, whatever, let me know. I'm exploring these options because right now I can't sustain the business. It's really drying up fast, which is unfortunate. But hey, it might pick up again. Who knows?
It's a strange time in the technology industry, especially with certain companies being banned from or strongly discouraged from operating in other countries. So where can people find you apart from Twitter and Instagram at TankGirl?
So at TankGirl on Twitter, Instagram. I think Facebook, if you type that, it'll probably come up as well.
If you search for Myriam Joire on Facebook, you'll definitely get Myriam there.
TNKGRL, like TankGirl the comic book without the vowels. That's how you can remember. If you know the TankGirl the comic book or the film, remove the vowels. That's my handle. Pretty much everywhere except on YouTube. So Myriam Joire is another way to find me. Spell out my full name. It's Myriam with a Y. That's the biggest mistake people make. The last name they can figure out usually. You can Google me. I'm on Wikipedia. Hey, I'm on IMDb even. Wow, I don't know how that happened.
Worst comes to the worst. If listeners of this podcast want to use the techtravelgeeks.com contact form, we'll pass on your details to Myriam if you're interested.
And by the way, you can reach me by email. It's tankgirl@gmail.com. TankGirl spell out without the vowels. It's very easy. Excellent. So the point is, you can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Myriam Joire. And it's a complement to the podcast. If you want to see unboxings, sometimes hands-ons, reviews, that sort of thing, that illustrate visually what I'm talking about on the show, which is an audio show, that's a good place to go. And then the podcast, as I mentioned earlier, is mobiletechpodcast.com. If you want to find it, the best thing to do is to search for Mobile Tech Podcast and then my handle, TankGirl, because it's podcast with TankGirl. Because the Mobile Tech Podcast pings so many similar shows, the 3 words, and searches on various podcasting platforms that I'm usually not at the top of the list. So if you add TankGirl, I'll be at the top of the list, guaranteed. The platform where you can find us pretty much guaranteed are iTunes, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Overcast, Slacker, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. I'm pretty sure all of these work. I discovered that I'm in TuneIn. I never did anything, that somehow I'm in there. When I got my Tesla, and it has TuneIn built in. So I typed in my podcast search and boom, there I was listening to myself, as one does when one drives a Tesla in California, because we're all narcissistic assholes. I'm not a asshole.
But I hear you drive very passionately.
Yes, I do. I don't know how much time we have, but before we go into the Tesla,
yes.
How much time do we have? Do we have time?
all the time in the world for you,
All right,
Myriam.
so let me talk about.
Let's talk about what you have in your bag. You mentioned you're going to
and I want to talk to you about where I go for travel for work. So that's the travel that I pay for as a business. So I go to Asia a lot. So Taiwan, China, usually Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and sometimes Korea, Seoul. And then in Europe, it seems to be, I say Europe, and I'm broadening the term of Europe. I try to be very inclusive as a born and raised European who's a very big believer in the European Union, who's very mad that the British are idiots with Brexit. I would like to say that I include Ukraine in Europe. So for better or for worse, you can shoot me if you want for that. I think I have a lot of clients from the Ukraine. I have a lot of clients. I've had some clients in Israel and France. Strangely, not in the UK and Germany and the Scandinavian countries. Although, those are pretty strong technologically as well. So anyway, I think those countries speak English very well. So they don't need my help to launch. Like, they don't need to kind of understand the market. I think they're very savvy about. So those are the countries I end up traveling. And it's really random. Sometimes it's combined. Like, I go to Computex and I'll stay an extra 2 weeks before or after to kind of like be with some clients and do some biz dev. But I'm basically, as you know, last year 2017 was my biggest travel year of my entire career, my entire life. I spent 185 days not in my homes.
Wow.
Yes. And that's including, road trips, because I do a lot of those as well. Because I can't, here's my problem. I can't stay still. So if I'm here in San Francisco, after a week, I start getting cabin fever. And same with Portland even more, because Portland, I don't, technically on paper, I don't live in the suburbs. I live right in the core of the city, but it feels like the suburbs to me. I don't know if you've been to these American cities where even old neighborhood feels like all you hear is lawnmowers and dogs and there's no cars going by on your street. And you're like, what is this? Like, I'm an urban person, right? So I go kind of mad, even though I love our place up there. It's really lovely. It's quiet. It's chill. We have a backyard, which I don't have in San Francisco. But so I have cabin fever. So that's my problem. Thankfully, I have a partner, spouse, who is wonderful and loves to travel with me. And I would say goes on about half of my trips. So we get to travel together and spend time together, which is really wonderful. So what's in my bag? So there's a lot of flying. There's a lot of driving because I have a camper van, a Volkswagen camper, which I take on road trips. Like, I like to go to South by Southwest. Oh, I didn't mention South by Southwest. I think I did, maybe as one of the things I do. I'm a judge there at the South by Southwest Accelerator. So they give me a free ticket every year and I just have to show up. So I just do a road trip. We get on the camper van, we drive a different way to get all the way to Texas and back. It takes like 5 days to drive out to Texas from California. In case the Europeans can wrap your heads around driving for 12 hours a day for 5 days. That's what it's like. But
then again, what are the speed limits you're constrained by?
I usually drive 70 to 80 miles an hour wherever I am because I'm a European. I have a heavy foot. I'm terrible. I'm thankfully I have a T5 transporter called the Eurovan in the US, which is basically not the rear engine camper, it's the front engine camper. And it has a bit more power and it could sustain these speeds for miles and miles and miles, which I think would be like 110, 120 kilometers an hour, 130 maybe at most. I'm very aware of what's around me in terms of, usually the speed limits in the US now are on big stretches are at least 65, if not 75 or 80. Like Texas is 85, like to give you an idea. So there are parts that you can really go. The problem is that you can easily go 10 over the limit usually, but you have to be careful. And if you get a ticket, it's just money, right? If you're in California and you get a ticket in one of the states I live in, then it's points and stuff. And then it becomes more complicated because you want to avoid that. I have to say that I get very few speeding tickets. I've probably gotten 3 or 4 in my entire life, and I'm 49. So that's not a bad one. A decade, I'm pretty due for another one. Knock on wood.
Just to be clear, the Tech Travel Geeks podcast does not advocate speeding. We would strongly advise you not to. Respects legal speed limits.
Always drive like Oregon drivers, 10 under the limit, just to be sure. And then create a giant traffic jam and piss everyone off.
But they have the benefit of no sales tax. They're saving money on fuel to be able to spend more as consumers.
You're right. Yeah,
in Edinburgh, we have a limit of 20 miles per hour in Edinburgh, in the city center and most of the city. So driving 10 under would be problematic.
Well, so here's the thing you have to understand. Portland City speed limit is 20 miles per hour as well. And people still drive 10. I am not kidding you. It is insane how cautious they are. And San Francisco has a global speed limit in the city of 25. And people drive 30, 35 all the time. It's no big deal, right? I mean, if you really go over 35, then an opportunistic officer of the law will potentially pull you over because they're like, sucker. But, other than that, it's pretty chill. California, generally, you're safe to go 10 over the limit. I mean, again, if you're visiting from some other country and doing a road trip in the US, I would strongly abide by Mateo's advice. I'm from here. I have a passport from here. I understand the states. I know which states I can speed in, which I can't. I really, as a foreigner, be really cautious because they're going to take advantage of you. They're crooked. They're going to make you pay a fine in cash on the spot or take you to jail or something stupid because you can't. They're not legally supposed to, but you can't. There's no recourse. What are you going to do? You don't know the laws. You don't understand. You don't have any rights because you're a foreigner. So be aware of that. So that's very travel-centric advice. So I have a camper van. I drive that on road trips. Sometimes we like to escape. Like we drove to Southern California recently to San Diego to see some friends for the weekend, like all the way from Portland, which is like a 2.5 day trip. We like that because we can work. We both work remotely. We both work online. It's feasible. There's good internet coverage in most places. Out in the middle of nowhere, it's a little harder. But you can find coffee shops with Wi-Fi. You can find a way to upload your work, whatever you need to do. So that's what I do. And then I have 2 cars because I'm a car nut. I have a Tesla Model 3 that I just got, and I got a Porsche Boxster S, which is older, 2001. And that's kind of like, one is a convertible for the summer. It's, all my cars that, other than the Model 3, are stick shift. So I like to get involved in my driving. And I used to have, I changed cars all the time. I had other cars before.
Just to check, is your Porsche Boxster okay after what happened with that drunken person bumping into it?
Yeah. No, I actually, it was a big dent on the rear right quarter panel, which I got removed by paintless dent removal. The art of like if there's no paint damage, you can pull the panel out with just suction and kind of pushing from the inside, and there's specialists that do this, and I paid for it. It was cheaper than going to a body shop and actually getting it painted and refilled. And also there's no filler. It's actually just the panel back to normal.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, we will link to it in the show description. Myriam's video from her fixed camera, which actually saw this drunken person bump into her car.
Yeah, I have a couple of Nest cameras looking out my window in San Francisco because I live next door to a bar, and there's a lot of crazy people at night being high or drunk or something. So I keep an eye out there, and somebody stumbled out of, like, they walked along the wall so you can't see them on the shot, and they went into our little entrance alcove area for the apartment. And there's a step going down from there. I think they probably lit up a cigarette or something, and as if went down the step, they missed the step, they didn't see it. And so they started tumbling, and they walked right into head and elbow first into my Porsche, which was parked right in front of the house. And that's the thing. San Francisco, it's a city. You park on the street. It's like, it's like being in Rome or something. You find a spot and you park, and you're done for a while. So that's how it works. And in Portland is a very different. I have a driveway and a garage, and think Americana. I almost have a white picket fence in front of the house. I mean, it's not really like that, but it's kind of like that.
So you mentioned you have a driveway, and you're looking to have an electric charger there. Tell us more about why.
Well, so look, the reality is that I have a Tesla Model 3, as I said. But I mean, the thing is, if you, in San Francisco, there's enough public charging, some of it free. Like there's 2 blocks away from my house, I can charge for free. If it's available, which, you can check on an app. There's all these platforms that provide free charging in exchange for watching ads or whatever. We're kind of ahead of the curve because it's the Bay Area. And of course, Tesla has a supercharging network, which is ubiquitous. And with a range of 310 miles, 500 kilometers, I don't have to charge very often if I'm just running errands. San Francisco City is 7 by 7 miles. It's 10 by 10 kilometers. So even if I drive around town for an hour, I will maybe drive 10, 15 kilometers. So now I can charge that back basically in 3 hours of plugged into a regular 110 volt US outlet.
Wow.
Right? Because it's very slow charging, but I've only driven 15 miles at this point. So, or 10 miles, 15 kilometers, right? So it's not, people don't realize that you have to break the mind pattern of fueling with gas. Once you understand that you can fuel at home or anywhere really there's an outlet, and once you realize that with enough range, in Tesla's case, and a large network of very high speed, 1 hour or less chargers and big highways and freeways regularly, for local driving, you can recoup that by overnight charging. So in Portland, I actually usually just plug into one of my outlets on the side of the house, that's used for like lawnmowers and whatever. It's a standard outlet. Like in Europe, it would be your standard 220 volt plug. And here it's 110 volts, just a higher amperage. It's 16 amp. And so you plug into that and I get about 4 miles of charge per hour of charge, which is very low, right? It's going to take me 15 hours if I have an empty battery, but I never have an empty battery. It never happens. The only time I run low is when I'm on the freeway and I stop from supercharger to supercharger and I refill in an hour. But I'm always sitting between 100 and 200 miles of range when I'm in both places. And then in San Francisco, I can't plug into the wall because there's a sidewalk in front of my house. There's no outlets. I have to find a public station. And there's many. Some are paid, some are free. The superchargers are unfortunately outside of the city, in all the cities. They're not, there's a few cities. I think Chicago has a supercharger in a parking garage inside the city. So you have to be in a really big city to get a supercharger inside the city. And Teslas can charge on anything. They come with adapters, so you can charge them on any normal outlet.
I was really impressed in Petaluma, the public parking in, I think it was near the old Twit studio. It had electric chargers and they were free for use. You just had a limit of 3 hours, I think, because it was on the ground floor. But that was really an eye opener to see. Yes, they are getting towards this electric vehicle world in California because there is the infrastructure. People are putting money into that charging network.
But I would argue that for most people, even if you don't have a Tesla with a long range, if you're just using your car to commute, like to run errands or go to work and back, if your home and work or one of them has even a regular plug, you can recoup most of that mileage in one night.
Awesome.
So I think a lot of people have to wrap their heads around that. I think that's what I'm learning. I was well aware, because I've driven a lot of electric cars as a tech journalist, that I wasn't going to have any issues. But what I'm finding right now is that I don't even have to find high-speed charging, level 2. Like or supercharging is level 3, which is DC, which is faster, But I don't even have to go for high speed. I can just go with a normal wall outlet and I recoup most, for me, because I don't commute anywhere. I just run errands. I can recoup all of my stuff. Pretty much.
Would you then say the Tesla Model 3 is the coolest gadget you can get just now?
I think it's like the iPhone was in its day. I think it's a pivotal piece of technology. We're going to look upon it as a huge change. And I think that it is certainly very cool. It has a lot of cachet. Absolutely, if you have one. I mean, that's part of the reason I got one, is because I like cool gadgets. I could afford it, etc. But I think that you can't underestimate how big of a change this is. It's not just an electric car. It is an electric car with great range, the best range of any Tesla, right? And I think short of maybe the high-end Model X or Model S, which is like the P100 or something. Mm-hmm. But it's incredible range, 310 miles, 500 kilometers. It has a great network of charging, which isn't free on the Model 3, but it's cheap. It's a third of the price of US gasoline. And US gasoline for you guys is half, probably, right? The price of Europe. So imagine a sixth of what you pay today for energy costs is what I pay for if I only use Tesla superchargers. Never mind all the free charging that's available to me. And when I charge at home, are you ready for these prices, my European friends?
Yes.
9 cents per kilowatt hour is what I pay. 9 cents per kilowatt hour, because the West Coast is covered in solar panels and windmills. Almost all of our energy comes from renewable resources. In fact, there's more and more containers full of lithium-ion batteries being used by utilities to balance out the fact that we have an overproduction during the daytime and no production at night, and in windy areas, no production when there's no wind. So that's the future that Tesla envisions as an energy company, because Tesla is not a car company. It's an energy company. They own solar gaps. They make the power walls for home users and for businesses, those big containers for utilities. And I think that's the future. And when the grid goes vehicle to grid, when the automation starts happening between my electrical provider in Portland and in San Francisco and my car will be used as a storage unit for the grid. So when I'm traveling for a week and my car is just sitting there plugged in, keeping a trickle charge, they can use my power and give me money and then replenish it for free. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a container of battery, right? So now the more of us have cars, and the more of us are on this network, the more of us become a part of the machine of power production and power balancing. It's not the production that's the issue now, it's the balancing of that power.
Indeed.
You have to wrap your head around this. Electrification takes a little bit of thinking outside the box. We're so invested in how we think about cars. And I'm the first one to be that way. I love my Porsche. I love the manual stick shift, no nannies connection to the car. There is something unbeatable about that. The smell of oil, the smell of gas. It is fantastic. I love it. But I think you will love what this brings to the table. And in 10 years, we'll look back and this will be the norm. This will be so normal. We will, and then there's driver automation, assistance, and self-driving that also kick in. But I think that's going to take a little while longer. But yeah, I could go on about it forever.
No, that's great. It's something
you still want to know what's in my bag.
Yes, which I'm assuming will be in the frunk or the trunk of the Tesla Model 3.
Right.
So just to make it clear, in the EU we seem to be behind on that, but we're going to have a bit more of a regulated or structured approach to rolling out this sort of infrastructure. And especially in Nordic countries, including Scotland, I'd say, where there's a lot of natural or renewable energy being created through winds, wave power, hydroelectric, and solar. So solar in Scotland doesn't really work, does it, Luca?
Yeah.
Not too much. This summer, lucky. We were lucky.
Yes, we were lucky this summer, but it is something that is going to happen. But I think that in typical European style, they'll do it as a structured, slightly more standardized rollout, a bit like the mobile telephony revolution about 20 years ago. And rather than having CDMA and GSM, we'll just have one standard and it will be simplified.
I agree.
Yes, it is coming, and it's good to watch what's happening in California, because this is going to affect travel in general, not just cars, but trains, buses.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think our goal here would be to have standardized infrastructure. And unfortunately, nobody's, in the US, the government is not going to mandate anything, especially this government. So especially they hate clean energy, right? The current regime is they don't even believe in climate change. So, I mean, clearly you have climate change. We have no rain here in California anymore, in San Francisco, which is impossible, unheard of. It's drier than ever. Portland has record temperatures and most of Europe has had record temperatures this summer. Yes. I mean, it's happening, and they don't believe in it, so they're not going to regulate anything related to that. So the private sector has just took over, and I think Tesla was the first, and I think Porsche's or VW Group is looking to roll out a network as well. But here's the wonderful thing about the Tesla: even though your CDMA versus GSM example is very valid here, if Tesla is CDMA, being the first at least to roll out in the US, they are compatible with GSM in the sense that I have adapters in my car today that let me charge on anything that exists today, including standard, level 2 J1772, which is the standard used in the US and Japan, which is actually an actual bona fide ISO plug. And et cetera. And I'm sure that when we get, DC charging adapters in the future for charging on CHAdeMO and CSS or whatever, CCS, whatever it's called, the DC standard that you guys are rolling out. In fact, Tesla in Europe sells their cars with a different plug. in the back than in US. You guys are already, they're already adopting whatever the standard is over there because regulation, right? Because they have to. And I think that's great. But it doesn't stop the principle that electrification is not just about the car and the range and the network, but it's about way more than that. It's about the whole energy grid. And we need to learn to wrap our heads around that. And, in the same way as we have an entire network of compatible systems in place for air travel that make it so awesome, right?
Yes.
I mean, I am sorry. I know that air travel can be really difficult for some people, especially people who don't travel often, who might be scared of flying or who might have bad experiences because they only fly economy occasionally and they have no status. But I'm sorry that I fly a lot and I'm constantly amazed at the fact that I'm in a metal tube in the sky doing 500 miles an hour and being teleported from continent to continent. It never fails to blow my mind. Yes, I have bad experiences. I also have great experiences because I have status and I get upgraded and all that. But I have bad experiences, but it doesn't stop me from loving to fly. And I think it's a magical thing. We live in a crazy magical time of technology that we can do that. And flying has never been cheaper worldwide.
Yes.
So if you're listening to this and you're an aspiring travel tech person, fly. Get on an airplane. Doesn't matter where you go somewhere. Make it a habit. Okay? And use public transit at your destination because you don't have a vehicle there. And in many places, if you're going to be in an urban environment, public transit rules. And if you want to go out in the uncharted lands, like I went to Iceland for a week and, public transit, not so much. So I rented a car and I drove a 4x4 around the ring road and It was amazing. It was expensive, but you know what? We made a holiday of it. It was great. So I think that, I love trains, by the way, being a French person. Come on, how can I not love trains, right? TGV, oui. So, of course, I love trains. We don't have too many trains in the U.S. Trains in the U.S. is sad. Sad trombone with trains.
In Italy, we have TAV, which is going to be plugging into TGV. So yes, in Europe, this approach to high-speed railways is much.
In Asia.
In Asia.
Asia is just insane.
Plus, there have been experiments with maglev in Asia as well, which.
Yeah. And then there's Hyperloop, which is a bit of a crazy idea, but I think it's going to take off. Once somebody spends the billions of dollars in infrastructure to build one and people see how good it is, it's going to be like, oh, maybe we should do more of that. And then it's just going to be a matter of infrastructure cost, value, whatever.
That's funny. That's funny you should mention that because Lukash and I were recently at the Hyperloop One Edinburgh University group's launch in Edinburgh. Where they were shipping off their prototype to California for testing. So we have quite a strong commitment here in the UK, both from the government side and other institutions in making a Hyperloop a thing here. The big attraction, especially to Lukash and I here in Edinburgh, is a 45-minute Hyperloop connection from the centre of Edinburgh to the centre of London.
Wow.
Which at the moment is a 4-hour train journey, or a 45-minute to an hour flight, but then you have to go through airport security.
Yeah, then it's 4 hours anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So Hyperloop is a thing, and one of the candidates' proposals is Edinburgh to London. So we're quite excited about that, and we do think, we do think that it has potential. It may not look like the current prototypes, but we hope it does roll out soon.
That would be lovely. There's been talk for a high-speed train in California between San Francisco and Los Angeles for a long time, which might now turn into a Hyperloop. Who knows? The infrastructure is being built in both cities to accommodate the line, as it were, and penetrating the city. The state, there's a new transit hub being built in downtown San Francisco, which has basically a big tunnel under the city going to outside to nothing right now, just in case. So they're thinking about it. It's been talked about for a long time. I think it's inevitable to happen because right now the biggest problem you have is that even though I think U.S. airports are pretty efficient, generally speaking, compared to other places, especially with TSA Pre and these other quick security systems. I'll give you an example. Part of the reason it's not a big deal for me to live in Portland is it's hours and 20 minutes door to door by plane. Yeah. And the flight is an hour and 10 minutes. So it's not that it's because if you fly at the right time, I'm literally 15 minutes away by car from the airport in both places. So that's half an hour. And I can time it so that I literally walk into the airport, go through security, sit in my seat in the plane, right? And then take off, land, get out the door, get on I never do check luggage. So get on the door, get out, Lyft, or Uber, and go to my destination. Lyft and Uber are very, very big in US cities because we don't have very good transit systems in most cities. And also we have very poor taxis. There are some exceptions. I think New York City has a great taxi infrastructure.
Yeah, in Edinburgh we have, though the locals complain about the public transit network, both the one tram we have and the buses, which are now all being upgraded to hybrid and electric buses, is very good. But taxis, and more specifically Uber recently, complement that. Sometimes if you want door-to-door, Uber is much more convenient and arguably safer than public transit. So
right.
it is a very convenient addition to public transit. Always, when I travel, I always make sure I have Uber, Lyft, and if in Asia, Grab installed on my devices so that I can use it. In the Middle East, there's Careem. If you go to Dubai.
No, I've only been to Abu Dhabi once, never actually Dubai. That's one of my destinations I want to check out one day.
Well, Lukesh and I were earlier this year. I was speaking at DroidCon Dubai, and Careem were one of the sponsors of the conference.
Nice.
So we got to speak to the developers, see how they made the app, what their development practices were. It was very, very interesting, and I'm always blown away by how complex. To a user, these apps look simple and easy, but the complexity behind them in making all this happen is astounding.
Yeah, for sure.
Big engineering challenges.
The logistics of on-demand car services are incredible, and I think we're learning a lot from that. Complemented with the logistics challenges that have been overcome to a great extent by companies like UPS and FedEx and DHL. We've learned collectively as a species a lot about optimizing this stuff now, and I think it's trickling down. You can see it happening in many other areas. I think it's very exciting.
We've come a long way from the never take a left turn in the US.
Correct. Yeah. So basically I travel mostly, I would say, by plane and by car, a bit of train, a bit of boat sometimes. Usually it's ferries for whatever touristic reason. Generally not really. I don't think I travel by boat usually for to get at a specific destination. And I love travel. I think it's fun, and I can't sit still too long, so it's kind of complements my life really nicely. What I travel with is a small messenger. Well, I have two messenger bags. One is basically my living things like clothes and toiletries and anything I need that it will stay in the hotel, or the Airbnb or the camper van or the whatever I am in at the time. My friend's couch, and then the other bag is kind of my day bag, and it has most of my equipment in it. And I carry a 12-inch MacBook as my primary computer. I carry a camera, which I'm using less and less. It's a Sony NEX C3. It's about 10 years old. It was at the time a pretty high-end APS-C interchangeable lens mirrorless camera. And I've got over 100,000 pictures taken on the odometer of that camera, and it's still working just fine. So I bought it to join Engadget. The only drawback is only shoots 720p video. But honestly, I use my Pixel 2 XL mostly for video these days because it does 1080p stabilize. It does even 4K stabilize, which is great. For my needs, it's good enough. I don't need to change lenses or anything too much. For photography, I still use my Nex because I'm very familiar with the workflow on that. And I can, for product photography, I'm much faster than using a smartphone, even though I've had some very good results with P20 Pro, the Pixel 2 XL, all the modern phones that have good cameras.
So you mentioned the P20 Pro. We talked about this on your show, the Mobile Tech Podcast. Are you still using that? Is it still one of your main devices that you carry with you?
It is in my rotation. I just dropped it temporarily to use the Honor 10. I finally got an Honor 10 to play with. So that's in my pocket, replacing the P20 Pro. I have a Moto Z3, which I just got in Chicago this week to play with in another pocket. I have a OnePlus 6 Red Edition currently. I've got all 3 colors. And I've got a Pixel 2 XL. The Pixel 2 XL's got my main SIM in it. I'm too lazy to install my apps on my review phones anymore. I kind of install my core apps on my review phones and have usually a bunch of review SIMs floating around. I also have a couple of SIMs on T-Mobile is my main provider, T-Mobile US, and I have some SIMs on AT&T as well.
Good tip for listeners of the Tech Travel Geeks podcast. If you're visiting the US, T-Mobile USA provides GSM SIMs, and if you're traveling from Europe, most likely to have 4G and 3G bands that are compatible with your device.
Correct.
They have a $30 30-day SIM card with 2 gigabytes of data, unlimited and calls and texts locally, which is handy if you ever need to use your device locally and make local phone calls.
What else do I have in my bag? I have a pair of Etymotic Research ER4SR in-ear monitors. These are for traveling on airplanes. They are do not do active noise canceling. They do passive noise cancellation, and I do not like the coloring that active noise cancellation provides to my music. I'm a bit of an audiophile. These are really high-end, really expensive, really nice in-ear monitors. I am thinking of getting custom molds made for them. They are actually compatible with custom molding, so we'll find out. But the point is, right now they isolate 30 dBs of noise when inserted in your ear, and a super flat in frequency response. And they're pretty high efficiency, so they work on any headphone amp pretty much out of the box. You don't need to have a separate amp. I have a pair of LG Bluetooth headphones that can also be used wired. They're just over the ear. They're foldable and portable. So they're both Bluetooth and wired. There's more for conference calls and maybe if I'm in a quieter environment, editing, podcast editing, video. They're collapsible, so they're small. They do Bluetooth so that they work with phones if I don't have an adapter. I have all of the adapters, but for some reason I forgot one. And then they work, they sound half decent. I would not listen to music with them very much. The Etymotics are really my go-to. And I have these big ones for when I'm in the studio, basically DT990 Pros, but they're not in my bag, so they don't count. I have all the chargers. I carry basically everything in my life is USB-C now, so I travel with 2 high-power 65-watt really small. One is my original Apple one from the MacBook 12-inch, and the other one is a company in China that stopped making it but made it briefly. It was the world's smallest 65-watt USB-C adapter. It hasn't exploded or caught fire, so I think I'm okay. I'm going to continue using it. It supports quick charge, power delivery, and of course 65 watt up to 12 volts, whatever number, it's 28 volts, whatever number amps, whatever the maximum is that USB-C can do in the PD standard. And so I use those 2 primarily. Every now and then I'll bring a custom charger if I have like a OnePlus or a Huawei, because they have much faster charging with their custom chargers. But usually I rely on quick charge and PD compatibility for charging. I have a bunch of cables that go from USB to USB, all the different kinds. I've got adapters for all the different analog USB-C to headphone, digital USB-C to headphone, and of course, Lightning to USB-C, because I do have an iPhone 10. So I don't usually use the iPhone 10 very much, but
So you've just mentioned a lot of cables. How do you manage your cables? Because this is really...
not very much. I have a pocket with a zipper in my bag that I just throw everything in there, and it kind of wrangles itself to death. And I pull it out, and there's spaghetti everywhere, and I just managed to make it work. I'm not very organized that way.
But then first thing when you get to a hotel or somewhere, when you get to bed, it's a nice relaxing thing to get over jet lag, is to untangle all your
cables.
Correct.
It's like a Zen thing. You're kind of like, It doesn't actually take that long. Thankfully, most of the cables I have, I wrap them around my hand usually a little bit, and then they stay kind of in a bundle. Usually they don't mesh too much on the flight, so it's okay. In the bottom though, there's kind of like a residue of cables at the bottom of the pocket from cables I haven't used in a long time, and those kind of like take a life of their own. Getting one of those out gets more challenging. I do carry a charger for my Sony camera because that doesn't charge over USB. I do carry a USB Type-C hub that does power delivery, so it gives me 2 USB 3 ports, 1 SD card, and passes through the USB-C charging. And I use that when I want to connect peripherals. I do also have to use a mini USB cable for my Samsung, the Korean company, but Samsung, S-O-N, the microphone manufacturer, Go Mic, which is a tiny portable condenser mic similar to this one here, but much smaller. Very high quality. And I plug it to the hub and then to the MacBook for audio recording. I know I could use a Zoom or a Lav or something, but I'm old school. I use a phone as a backup, voice recorder next to it in airplane mode, so there's no interference. That's how I record my podcasts. Audacity, Skype usually, or Hangouts on Air like this. And then what else is in my bag? There's a few other key things. There's that microphone and its cable, which is critical. The hub. Trying to think. I've got a pair of glasses. I have my reading glasses on right now. These are my normal glasses, so I swap between them. Those are in my bag. Usually I have a pair of sunglasses in there. I have a big battery pack, which is power. It's USB-C, so it's like a 10,000 milliamp hour.
So a 10,000 milliamp hour power bank?
Power bank that's PD compliant. It doesn't really charge my laptop, but it does charge my phones. And then what else do I have? I have to look in the bag, really. Let me think mentally, look in the bag. There is, I have, basically it's just adapters and cables. I have a bunch of I have a little sub zipper pocket that has the short adapters, like the USB-C to 3.5 millimeter. They're all bundled together in one little happy place. Like I have you have the Apple USB-C to USB-A female adapter, the one that every now and then, if I have to plug something just without the hub, it's very convenient to have that. It's etc. I have pens. I have my passport. Usually it's on my person when I travel, but when I'm at home, I leave it in there.
So do you carry a SIM ejector tool with you?
I have a safety pin at all times on my keychain.
Awesome.
That's my SIM ejector tool. Sometimes it stabs things a little bit, but whatever. It works. I live dangerously.
Obviously, you are Tank Girl. You are the mobile expert. What apps do you use for traveling? So what do you listen to podcasts on? What do you watch video on?
Pocket Casts for audio, because I'm mostly an Android user. I do have an iPhone 10, but I don't use it all the time. Sometimes it stays at home. So Pocket Casts, video, I use YouTube and the built-in video player or whatever it is. I don't actually, what does play video on a Pixel? Good question. I think there's just a built-in video player.
Oh, so you don't use an app like Amazon Prime Video?
No, I don't watch videos really. Like I have Netflix on my phone, but I don't really use it that much. That's probably the only I have Amazon Prime and Netflix, but I don't have the Amazon Prime Video installed.
Okay. And do you travel with a tablet nowadays, or have you gone past that level?
No, I did for a while, but it's just more like I try to be as light as I can, so I'm super efficient about minimalizing things. Every 6 months or so, I go through and get rid of anything that I'm not using anymore, even though it might come in handy. I do have a power bar. I have a 3-power plug, 3-socket, very short tail US power bar, and then all the adapters. But they're not one of those big bulky things with the prongs that come out. They're actually individual adapters for most of the markets that I use, 2 of each. And the reason for that is because one goes to the power bar and stays in my hotel room, and then the other one comes with me on the go and works with whatever I have. And so I have one for China, Australia. I have one for Europe. Well, a pair for Europe, a pair for China, a pair for the UK. And that's it, because I don't really go anywhere else that I need anything else.
That's pretty.
Those are the 3 that I use. And so what else do I have in the bag? I said passport, business cards. I do have some spare SD cards and things like that for the camera in case one breaks. Any SIMs that I have for various countries that I visit that are still active live in the bag. Labeled usually because I have bad eyesight, so I don't really know when it's in the dark. I'm on the plane, we're landing, and everything is moving. I'm trying to find my SIM in there. So I have like big, like HK. I just put it in there. I know it's Hong Kong. CN for China. AT for AT&T. TM for T-Mo. I think that's US, because I think most of my SIMs for Europe are Vodafone. And then, it's very, it's like all of us are pretty organized. My MacBook lives in a sleeve. It's a neoprene sleeve, so it's protected in there. Can drop. Basically, my rule is I should be able to drop my bag from shoulder height, and nothing should break in it.
That's
so
a very good
I make sure
rule.
that things are bundled in such a way that happens. There are a lot of things that I don't need that will shock resistant enough, like my cases and my glasses are not going to get damaged. They're protected in there. The power pack unlikely to get damaged, but the camera is bundled in a little neoprene case, and the laptop is. And I always have a few phones that I kind of put in there as well, and they travel in Ziploc bags, so I put them in Ziploc bags so they don't get scratched. But they just get tossed in the bag, and good luck what happens to them. I've never broken a phone in my bag, even dropping my bag. So
that's really good. Do you have any problems going security with all that tech in one bag?
Most of the time I don't. Every now and then, depends on the country. Sometimes when they search me, like, sometimes it does go off. Their systems goes off because there's a lot in there. The Europeans don't like the cable nest very much. I've learned that. So what I found is that the Asia is fine, US is fine, but the European, especially Switzerland, does not like the cable nest. So what I generally do is I remove everything else, which is like, think about it, it's not that much. The camera, the laptop, the phones, and the power pack, and maybe I leave the headphones in there. And I just leave the nest in there. And then the X-ray machine actually gives them a view of the nest, which satisfies them. And they don't bug me about it. Sometimes they'll open it and swipe, do the explosive swipe thing. But I've never really had any issues. Switzerland has been a little annoying at times, asking me too many questions, but they haven't recently. There one time I came back from Engadget, and I came back from Mobile Congress to Zurich, and I had a big Nikon with me, like a big, telescope Nikon, like 70-220 lens on a D800E, and they were like, "What is all this?" And I'm like, "I'm a tech journalist. Leave me alone. I'm just coming home, okay? I just want to go through security. Leave me alone. Be nice." And I spoke German and French with them, just that way they would just leave me alone. It worked. They were like, "Oh, you're one of us. Okay, go." The Swiss, they're weird. But we love them. So anyway, this is my normal gear bag. And I was at Engadget, had more stuff. I used to travel with a tablet. I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of Android tablet, maybe an NVIDIA Shield for a while, or whatever the tablet they made for a while called Shield was. I had iPads in there. Whatever. But I've always had the smallest Mac you could buy. Back in the day, it was 12-inch Mac PowerBook G4 for a long time.
Wow.
And then I had the original MacBook Air. Then I had MacBook Air 11. Then I went to 12-inch MacBook.
So wait a minute, you had the manila envelope one?
I did.
So
I've been living with one USB port for so long that it's really not an issue anymore.
So did you appreciate the EPC manila envelope adverts not long after the Apple one?
I did. It was funny.
Very good.
Anyway, so that's, I think, in a nutshell, what's in the bag. There's, I keep the basic stuff. That I do have a piece of technology that I don't generally keep in my work bag because it travels with my clothes, and my toiletries is in the other bag, which is a Bluetooth speaker. It's a tiny little Le TV from the days when Le Eco was called Le TV.
Yes.
Got it for free. It's small. It sounds great. It has no controls over it, so it's very simple. It's just passive, no microphone, like just a speaker. And I put it up in my hotel room usually and leave it there for the whole time I'm there. And it's usually on a charge. I do one trip on a charge with that thing. I never charge it until I get home. That's it.
There are two things that I have that I'm wondering if you played with that I keep in my bag. One of them is a drone, which I use,
yeah.
And the other one is a Nintendo Switch. Since you've been a game developer, have you used any of those? And have you played with them?
I've used the Switch. I think it's a fantastic platform. I don't have one. I don't spend money on video game platforms anymore. I love games, but I don't play them enough to really justify the cost. And I'm sure I could get a review in it if I really wanted to. Drones, I'm very excited about. I would love to get like the smallest Mavic from DJI or whatever it's called, the tiny little one. It's not called Mavic. Air.
Air. I've got this one. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to get one. I'd like to experiment, but I haven't taken the plunge yet. I find that most of my photography these days, other than actual product photography stills that I use my old camera because of the workflow that I'm used to, I pretty much do everything with phones. I always have 4 phones on my person usually because I have 4 pockets on all my pants, and I have at least 2 or 3 more in the bag. So I swap phones around a lot, and I live on my phones a lot. Like when I'm flying, I usually take the opportunity to to sleep and I can sleep on planes magically. Not very well, but I can. Or to catch up on entertainment. So I watch a lot of the movies on the in-flight entertainment system if I'm not having to sleep. But most of the time I have something to do. So I'll pull out the laptop and work offline, like I use Google Chrome offline, Google Docs a lot and stuff like that. Or I'll fire up good old TextEdit or Word or something to type something offline and work on stuff offline. Editing audio and video offline is awesome. So I do a lot of that when I fly. So honestly, I mean, for me, the entertainment when I travel comes mostly from taking photos. I just like try to look for things to take photos of and take those shots. Like you see a lot of photos on my Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. They're really highly curated. You see 1/10 to 1/100th of what I take. There's so many photos. It's ridiculous. I'm so picky about what I post. So
what's your photo service of choice online?
Google Photos.
Good to hear. Yeah. That unlimited storage does help.
Yeah. So I use Google Photos for storage. I have a Flickr account that has a lot of my old photos on it that I should probably transfer to Google Photos. I have a NAS here in San Francisco that I can remotely access from anywhere that has an even bigger collection of all my backups of Joire before Google Photos was my main platform. And I have, I use my editors of choice are the Google Photos editor on my phone and Snapseed. I used to use VSCO Cam, but I haven't used it recently. I used to use Photoshop, whatever it was, Elements, whatever, the baby version of Photoshop. I can't remember what it's called for mobile, but now they want you to log into their system. And I'm like, no, I don't want to subscribe to your thing. I mean, I use an old version of Photoshop that doesn't connect to the internet to edit on my Mac. It's like CS5 or something, I have a license for it. So they haven't yanked it from me. So I'm good. But I don't use Lightroom or anything. Like I'm very, my editing needs, my rule, and this is something I learned from being at Engadget when I had to take product photography that had to be right the first time, is that I believe that the developing part of my photos is minimal. Like I need to be able to do it with the simplest tools, which is why I love Google Photos so much. Because for me, it's really about white balance, and exposure, and if maybe color temperature and tweaking a few things like that. I sometimes crop and rotate, but it's very rare. I tend to nail the white balance ahead of time on the device, on the camera, and nail the crop and the angle from the get-go. That's my rule. Composition and exposure and white balance, get that as close as I can so that the tweaking is minimal. Like I see people doing these crazy workflows in Lightroom where they spend hours, and I'm like, I admire that, I respect that, but I don't have time for that. Like,
yeah,
it's gotta be raw as much as I can, not raw the format, but like the immediate,
So if you follow Myriam on Instagram or Twitter, and I strongly suggest you do if you don't. She's also very good at hashtagging her images and making sure she includes what she has taken the pictures of. Yeah. Do you make that a rule to yourself just to avoid follow-up questions?
The problem is that Twitter and Facebook don't keep the metadata, right? They don't. They throw the EXIF out. Google keeps the EXIF. Google Plus keeps the EXIF usually, which is great. But I find that it's, I don't think I need to get into that much. There are some photos when I specifically am so blown away by what I've managed to do with a camera phone where I'll put the ISO in the hashtag. Like I'll put the info because I'm like, this is incredible. Look at this photo. Look at what the parameters were on that. But I usually just at least specify in a hashtag what phone I took it with, just so people have an idea.
Yeah.
I don't generally specify a hashtag when it's an actual camera, like I have a bunch of other cameras. I have that I sometimes travel with. I replaced the NEX, the Sony that I have, with a Fujifilm X30 is another one of my favorite. That one is, if I go on a non-business trip where I know I don't have to take product photography, but I want a really, really involved manual camera with all the manual dials and settings on it that I can do everything by hand, my Fujifilm X30 is the one. It's a smaller sensor than the APS-C, but it's a really high quality sensor and image processing, and it has a really fast lens. It's a zoom lens, only 3 times optical. It's fixed, it's not removable, but it's it's a delight because you basically have a control at your fingertips for everything, like shutter speed, aperture, focus can be manual if you want, and of course you can do exposure, all without taking your face from the viewfinder. It's an OLED viewfinder. It's really good. So I love that little camera. It was a gift from my spouse to me, and I use it when I travel. That's my travel camera for personal entertainment trips, not business trips.
Yeah. Excellent. So you'll be at Burning Man this year. So if anyone's at Burning Man,
yeah,
that tank girl.
Swing by the coffee shop in the center camp and ask for me. Don't ask for me by my name, Myriam, because nobody really knows me by there. My playa name is Max, M-A-X. So just go ask for Max or Maxie, M-A-X-I-E. People know me as that, and I may or may not be there depending on what my work hours are. And people will. If I'm there, they'll probably find me, and you can come say hi and get a free coffee or something. I manage the coffee shop while I work there, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And will you be in San Francisco at the end of September?
I don't know. I think I will be in the Ukraine or China or both. I think I have a round the world trip coming up, my second one, where I start at one end and go forward in time, and now I'm already ahead of time by a day or two from having done it before than everyone else. I live in the future. And so this is going to further my living in the future by me going from San Francisco and not going east again after that. So I'm going, I think, from SFO to Shenzhen, well, San Francisco to Hong Kong, to Shenzhen, to Hong Kong, to Istanbul or Kiev, or I don't know if there's a direct flight to Kiev from Hong Kong. I don't think so. So it's probably Istanbul or Frankfurt or some European city to Kiev, back to wherever European city to SFO. Wow. So that's the plan.
Oh, that's very good.
I haven't ticketed that yet, so stay tuned for details.
Who is your airline or airline alliance of choice?
I have two, which is really annoying because for the inside the US, I have a different one than for travel abroad. And so it's hard to maintain two statuses. I don't know, statuses.
Technically stati, but statuses is.
And so I'm about to try to unify that. I am on. I was a Virgin America customer in the U.S., which it was an amazing airline, the best U.S. airline, and especially if you flew from big city to big city like I did. And it was acquired by Alaska Airlines, which is not a bad airline, but it certainly has downgraded the experience significantly for me. And then I am a United Airlines Star Alliance member because I don't fly United. I hate them with a passion. I think they're one of the worst airlines in the world. However, they're getting better. Their Polaris business class service is pretty decent. And they are partners with phenomenal airlines like Lufthansa, Eva Air, Turkish, and a few others that I love to fly. So I get most of my status on United by flying partners internationally a lot. And there you go.
Very good.
I'm thinking, either to unify those two is difficult. I would have to suffer flying United between Portland and San Francisco a lot, which I do not want to do. But I'm thinking maybe Delta or American. And then, that would mean a lot of, new partner airlines and stuff. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. In the US, it's much easier to change loyalty. They do offer buyouts. So they'll give you the equivalent in terms of miles and status as what you have in one airline to gain you as a customer on another.
Exactly.
Though it does become quite complicated.
Yes.
And does. When you fly to France, is it still Lufthansa? Do you fly via Frankfurt?
Lufthansa is a lot of what I fly because it's just great way to enter Europe, right? Turkish is pretty good too. And I would say Lufthansa or KLM is generally my go-tos for partners. KLM is not partner on Star Alliance, though, is there?
No, it's a SkyTeam Delta.
Well, I think they're actually with Alaska. That's why I fly.
Oh, okay, that's good.
So there's some limited foreign partnership that I have with flying Alaska that are perks. Like I think Singapore or no, Cathay Pacific. One of those two is with Alaska as well, which is super
very
awesome.
handy.
Like they're great airlines. But I need to, if I was in Europe, I think I'd fly much more through Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and I'll probably be more on Emirates and Qatar and Etihad and somewhere or another. So that's an area that I feel I'm missing out on because I hear those are the best airlines. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of an airline snob. When you fly as much as I do, and you do too, so it's like, United, like American, and I don't mean American Airlines, the company. American Airlines are shit. I mean, they're so bad, okay? Like, it is such a nightmare to fly them. So I feel like even European airlines pale in comparison to Asian airlines, in my opinion. I mean,
yeah, the newer airlines where there's a lot more competition in terms of service are showing up. It's an interesting environment, which we are looking to cover a bit more on Tech Travel Geeks, because how you manage your status through apps and services, how new boarding pass technologies will be applied, is an area which we're going to look into covering a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think
it'll be good. Well, Myriam, we've mentioned your Twitter handle at tankgirl with no vowels, your Instagram handle at tankgirl with no vowels. If people are interested in getting in touch with you or interested in hiring your consultancy services,
tankgirl at Gmail. So tankgirl without the vowels. Yeah.
Without the vowels. That's great. Thank you very much for being on this podcast.
Please subscribe to Mobile Tech Podcast as well, mobiletechpodcast.com, and my YouTube channel, and like the videos if you do.
Yes, and also do sign up to Audible if you haven't, using Myriam's Mobile Tech Podcast.
It's if I can say on the air, if you let me.
Go ahead. We're not monetized.
Actually, it's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. audibletrial.com/mobiletech.
Please do go and sign up to Audible from there if you haven't already signed up. Sadly, I'm an Audible subscriber of 10 years now. Thank you very much, Myriam, for being on not the Mobile Tech Podcast. That's your one. Thank you for being on the Tech Travel Geeks Podcast. And Lukasz, thank you for getting the conversation going in Tesla.
Yeah.
That's all from the Tech Travel Geeks. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts. We will be available through more syndication services soon. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, Myriam. Thanks, Lukasz. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.